Welcome back to Grit City Tales, podcast hosted by the Humane Society for Tacoma and Pierce County. I'm Mary.
And I'm Maggie.
And together we're amplifying the untold stories of pets and the people who love them right from the heart of Pierce County and Tacoma, Washington. Thanks for joining us. Maggie, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about microchipping your pets. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you maybe not so much, so we're going to dive in a little deeper on what it is and why it is so important.
Yeah, we harp a lot on microchip your pet, make sure they have a tag, make sure they're spayed and neutered. But what does that mean? For us, it's common language, but we just want to kind of go through some of the most commonly asked questions. And so, Maggie, I'm going to ask you some questions, and it's a free-for-all. You tell me what are the answers to these questions?
What are the answers?
What are
Let's
these
see
things?
if I know.
Let's see if she knows,
Well,
the Humane Education Coordinator.
Should we first start, unless it's in the questions of, like, what is a microchip to begin with?
That is the number one question. What is a pet microchip?
Alrighty. Well, so a microchip is, they're tiny little computer chips. They're the size of a grain of rice. They're kind of just this little cylinder that, it very rice shaped as well as sized, and inside of a microchipping needle is where that microchip goes, and when it is put into the animal, just like a vaccine, it then stays under their skin and acts kind of like a permanent name tag for the pet. It's something that, while name tags and collars are very important, they're a very easily identifiable item on a pet to help someone that just found them to know, oh, this is an owned animal, it belongs to someone. They can look at the tag as well. But when things like tags fall off or collars fall off altogether, this microchip is under their skin and it acts kind of like a permanent name tag, so that if a pet is found and taken to either a local veterinarian or the shelter, we can scan them and find the info that is saved on the microchip. As a little aside from our conversation with Cat Luminati last week, or if we want to just touch on we've been having kind of a cat theme lately in our podcast. Trap, neuter, and release programs will also microchip the feral cats that have been spayed or neutered, ear-tipped, and put back out in the community. So if they're found or trapped by someone, it can also be like linked to just an organization or kind of
the property owner or whoever stated that pet could come back onto the land. Yeah.
So even if it's not necessarily to get a pet back to its owner, it can be a way to identify an animal that is a beloved community cat, maybe something along those lines. So there are lots of great uses for a microchip.
So if I brought in a cat that I found, how do the receiving clerks or whoever intakes the animal, what do they do to be able to see if they have a microchip?
Well, that's a good question, because there are just these tiny little things we're talking about that are so important, but these tiny little grains of rice under their skin, how do we find the info that's saved on them? Well, if you were to find a pet, say a cat you brought in, and even if you took it to a local veterinarian just because you were like, hey, I want to see if this pet has a microchip. Veterinarians and us here at the shelter, we have scanners, and they're just these little handheld devices that can pick up if an animal has a microchip. So we turn it on, we rub it all over the animal. Microchips are usually placed kind of at the base of the neck or between the shoulder blades. Sometimes they can migrate a little bit. We
found them in legs before. They migrate sometimes.
So we definitely want to be thorough and make sure that if there's a microchip in that pet, we found it. And so the little scanner picks up on the microchip and spits out like a 15-digit number. Each microchip has its own unique ID number. And then the vet or us here can take that number that pops up from the scanner, type it into our computer system, and search in the database what info is attached to that microchip.
We have to figure out what company it is, and then, for shelters, it's information that we can gather.
Same with a vet. They'll have like logins that allow us to look at the info saved on a microchip. So not anybody can necessarily just get your information off of a microchip. It's if they come in, they're scanned, then we have to log into the database to be able to see who that pet belongs to. The information that's saved on the microchip can be pretty basic, or some microchip companies will allow you to save even more info on the microchip. Like, usually it's at least the owner's name, address, phone number, and maybe the pet's name. Sometimes you
emergency
can save
contact, vet contact.
Sometimes you can save way more.
Mm-hmm.
The breed, the age, like all kinds of info about it.
And it's important to note that microchips don't work unless you update your information. And so if you're not aware of how, like, once you get that microchip implanted, say during their spay-neuter surgery or at your vet, make sure you know what company it is so that you can update if you move, if you change your phone number. It's implanted, but then you need to update the information.
Yeah, and register it in the first place.
Right.
Normally, like a veterinary clinic, the mobile vaccine clinics, us here at the shelter, we offer microchipping. And through us, we at least get it saved in our system that microchip pet is linked to you. When you adopt a pet, all of them come microchipped, and so we link it in our system. If you don't register the microchip through whatever organization or company manufactures the microchip, then it doesn't do that pet a lot of good, because when they are taken to a vet or shelter, if they have been lost, then it's going to just show that the microchip was never registered. So it's really important, like you're saying, to make sure that you register it in the first place, but also if you move or get a new phone number, or even if you rehome it, if for whatever reason the pet is rehomed, give that information to their new family so that they can keep it up to date as well.
Yeah. And, I'm looking at the questions here, and the next question is, can a microchip be tracked? Like, if I have the number, can I find where my pet is out in the world?
A lot of students actually ask me that question when I'm in presentations. And no, the microchips that are used for our purposes here at the shelter and for IDing pets, those are not like GPS trackers.
Mm-hmm.
You would get, those exist. You can get like a little GPS. I think there's like air tags, and they're called all kinds of different things. If you go online, you can definitely buy basically a name tag that is a GPS tracker for your pet. But the microchips that we are using and that vets are using for IDing your pet, those are not tracking microchips.
Okay. So it only works if your information is connected and someone brings that pet to a vet or a shelter and it's scanned, and then that information is brought up through the database.
Yeah, and then that organization can contact you, let you know, hey, your pet's here waiting for you.
Yeah. I was interested when when we were doing research for the podcast. I was like, when did microchips become a common practice? Because every single pet that gets adopted from our shelter gets microchipped. And so I'm thinking, when did that become a common practice? Are you aware of that?
I was trying to look that up as well, because in kind of our lifetime, it's become a very normal thing to do for your pets, but it wasn't always a standard practice. What I found, it looks like in the late 80s, that kind of became a time when microchips were used more for pets. In the early 80s, I was reading, it was commonly used for tracking fish migrations.
Oh.
So scientists would use the microchips for, when they would go out to try to locate fish populations or whatnot, they could identify maybe where that fish originated to then where it migrated to. So in science, like studying wildlife, it was used a little earlier, but it looks like from at least a preliminary search, it wasn't kind of a common thing to use in pets until the late 80s.
That makes sense. I definitely think it's a form of technology that is absolutely needed, and I highly recommend it to everyone that I talk to.
Oh, same. It's another safety net is what I like to think of it as.
Mm-hmm.
If my dogs were to get lost, even my rabbits, they're microchipped as well. That's the other thing. You can microchip a number of different pets. We only microchip the dogs, cats, and rabbits, I believe. And ferrets.
It's a tiny little grain of rice. So and does it hurt
Okay, I can say from experience, actually, that it doesn't, because when I was being trained to microchip pets here at the shelter, I kind of accidentally put the needle through one of my fingers.
You microchipped yourself.
Well, the microchip was in the puppy that I was microchipping, but the microchip needle ended up going through my finger. I was microchipping a puppy who took it like a champ. No whines, no squeaks, no nothing. And like I mentioned earlier, they usually go at least for dogs and cats and rabbits. The microchips go kind of at the base of the neck or between the shoulder blades, that area where you can
their scruff is.
Yeah, that scruff where you can pick up that little, we call it a tent. You make a little tent with their skin, and you put the needle into that little tent, and then you dispense the microchip under their skin, and that's where it stays. Well, I did that. The puppy took it like a champ, and then I went to go put the lid back on the needle, and whoopsie, and it went through. The needle went through my finger, but I didn't even realize that it went through all the way until I looked at it, because it's actually very, very sharp. So it went in nice and smooth. It was a clean
break.
Clean break. And
so from experience,
it actually
it's not that bad.
The needles can look scary to people, though, especially when they see their little puppy or their little kitten on the vet table, or bring it into one of our clinics. They see that microchip needle and they're like, whoa, is this going to hurt my baby? And I can also say from experience that my dogs, when they were puppies, that my dogs are pretty dramatic. And they were 9 weeks old when I got them microchipped, and they also did not make a peep or a squeak.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that they need to be under anesthesia for a microchip. That's not the case. Like Maggie said, it's
just like a vaccine, basically.
Just like a vaccine. And, a lot of the times our vets will do it while they're under anesthesia for their spay and neuter surgery. It's like a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
Which is nice, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, it's nice if they're going under for something else to be able to do all of that, because they're calm. They don't notice what's happening. But if you do want to just stop by at either, a mobile clinic, or you have an appointment with your vet, or you want to get microchipped through us, which we can talk about as well, they don't have to be put under for anesthesia. They just come in, get their microchip like they would a vaccine, and they're on their merry little way.
Yeah. We have vaccine and wellness clinics monthly, every fourth Saturday of the month, and you can get a microchip for $25.
And here at our shelter, we actually offer microchipping as a walk-in service, so no appointment is necessary. You can come down to our location here on Center Street, and it is for low-income residents. It's $25. You come in, you say that you're here to get your pet a microchip, and the procedure only takes a minute and can be done 7 days a week. And so that can be, like we were talking about, that extra measure of protection for your pet. But it's easy peasy.
If you're not sure what company or manufacturer your microchip is through, there's a handy-dandy tool called Pet Microchip Look Up, and you can just search with your microchip number and figure out what manufacturer and how to update your information. And so anyone that's listening to this, if you haven't updated your information in a while, give it a try, see if it's updated, and your pet will thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely something that can reduce the stress on the human and the pet.
Right, and I have a husky, and so she's gotten loose multiple times when she lived with just my husband. I'm extra cautious because I know huskies are escape artists. And she didn't have a microchip at the time, and it was terrifying not knowing.
Lucky that you got her back.
Yeah. She just came back after an hour and was like, "Hey, where's the food?"
Like she didn't just stress you out, near-death experience for an hour. Just, hey, I'm back.
Hey, what's up? I went and got her microchip the next day. And so don't wait till after your pet gets out or your pet disappears for them to have a microchip. Do it proactively. According to a nonprofit animal welfare charity, Petco Love, they state that 1 in 3 pets will go missing in their lifetime. And I just told you the story about my pet, and I'm one of those people that are locked down. That dog's not going anywhere. And it happens. It happens to all of us. And so, make sure that you get your pet microchipped. Another story is I was going home. It was dark. I saw this German Shepherd running towards my car right outside my neighborhood. And I was like, oh, no. And so I pull over, I grab my handy dandy little slip lead that's in my car, and she was scared, and I had Grimly in the car, my dog, so it was actually helpful to have Grimly because she came up to the car, I looped her up. Always be wary of other dogs that you don't know. And so, I took my time in the pitch black on the road. That was interesting. And I looped her up, and I saw that she had a tag, so I called the owner, and it was the house right next door. And so, you know how many pets are found that are found within a couple blocks from their home? And so that tag saved a world of hurt, because I would have taken that dog to the Humane Society all the way in Tacoma, 30 minutes away. They would have had to intake the dog, call the microchip, or look up the microchip, call the pet guardian. Pet guardian would have to go all the way down there, pay the fees. That's why you need a tag. That's why you need a microchip, because it saves a lot of hurt.
Well, and
a lot of time wasted.
As much as we do what we can for the animals here to help make their stay pleasant, it's a stressful place. Mm-hmm. If we can avoid the animal coming into the shelter altogether, that's the biggest help.
It saves them a lot of stress. It saves the owner a lot of stress, and it saves the shelter a lot of stress. And so I'm really grateful they had a tag. I texted afterwards, and I was like, hey, if you need help with spay neuter, if you need a microchip, blah, blah, blah. They said, oh, she's already microchipped. I'm like, thank you. That's great. I saw her last week, actually, again. And I shouted out the window, go home. and she went back to her house. And so, the Cat Illuminati said, talk to the neighbors. Talk to the neighbors. See what's going on in the community. Yeah, and there's stories that we hear every day about pets getting back to their guardians through microchip services. And you're aware of the story of Pierre?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me.
Okay. So for those of you that have listened to the last few episodes, you probably realize that I am kind of obsessed with fluffy black cats. Mm-hmm. And so when we have a fluffy black cat in the shelter, I tend to take note and go visit it. If it's nice and will let me, I definitely go and say hello. And so there was this fluffy black cat who on his kennel card said his name was Pierre. And I went and visited him one day, and then I came back the next day, and he wasn't there in his kennel. And I was like, oh, I went and asked someone else. I asked them, where's Pierre? Has he been adopted? And they were like, no, he was returned to his family. He'd actually been reunited. He was gone for like 12 years. And so they were able to reunite. I was like, what?
What was he doing for 12 years?
His family got him when he was a kitten, and they had microchipped him. Mm-hmm. And then he went missing. And
wow.
12 years later, because of that microchip, he was brought to our shelter by just a Good Samaritan that had found him under their car. It was a really hot day, and they noticed that he was kind of matted and stuff. And he was a fluffy black cat, so mats happen. And so he was brought into the shelter, and every animal is scanned for a microchip. And so they found that microchip, but the fact that it was to the owners who originally got him 12 years earlier.
Can you imagine getting that call saying, like, after you went through the 7 stages of grief, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I
think it threw them for a loop. In Pierre's notes, it was kind of like the owner was saying that, oh wow, we haven't seen him for like 12 years.
Yeah, he thought the phone call was wild.
Yeah, so it was noted that even the owner, the original owner, was just kind of taken aback by the fact that this cat was back in his life. And so he let his family know, and they came and got Pierre the next day. So I don't know what Pierre had been doing for 12 years. He was healthy still. Mm-hmm. He'd obviously either been like a community cat, maybe going from house to house, or somebody took him in and didn't know he was microchipped.
Oh, that's such a heartwarming story, because they thought that cat was gone.
Yeah. And the goal would be obviously to get your pet back to you before 12 years.
Well, yeah.
That is what microchips are more able to do more often.
My parents reach out often, and they say, you know, we found this stray cat. What should we do? What's our next step? I say often because they have 7 cats now. But I'll be like, you know, you need to take them to a shelter or vet, get them scanned for a microchip, see if they're spayed and neutered, you know, ask the neighbors if they have a cat, do all the things. Most of the time, or the last 2 times, it's been a community cat that they've ended up adopting and getting them spayed and neutered and microchipped. But I just think it's hilarious that this has happened multiple times in my family. I grew up with 7 cats. Like, we're cat people for sure.
Nothing wrong with that.
We like dogs too. I think we'll have some podcasts about dogs coming up.
Yes. Don't worry.
If you're not a cat person,
yeah,
it's coming. But I also want to talk about Teddy Bear, which is a very heartwarming story that happened in 2021 with one of my coworkers. It was a dog that came in, a German Shepherd dog who had been brought in by a Good Samaritan, a hiker. They were hiking in the Wenatchee National Forest, and they found this German Shepherd that was just meandering and had gotten lost in the forest. I cannot imagine losing my dog on a hike. Like, that is just heartbreaking.
It's another level of worry that I'm
because my dog is my protector on hikes too. So it's like, whoa, where'd you go? But I can also imagine her chasing a squirrel off into the woods.
Well, yeah.
I can see that. So they found the dog in the Wenatchee Forest, brought them here to the Humane Society. We called the owner, and he's all the way in Yakima, the owner. So we were like, oh no, how do we get this dog back to its owner?
Because the hikers were from Tacoma, right? They just went over to do the hike, and so they found the dog and then brought him back to their local shelter because they didn't know what else to do.
That's something.
That's what I would probably do as well.
Yeah, and so he was here at Tacoma, and the owner was in Yakima, and so we worked with our partner organizations, Seattle Humane and Yakima Humane Society, and we got that dog back to its owner.
Well, yeah, because if you were to lose, like if I were to lose, one of my dogs, I wouldn't think to go look at the Yakima Humane Society.
No, you would look at your local shelter.
Lost and found pets, yeah. So I can't imagine if that owner was just like coming up on dead ends, like where could my dog have possibly gone?
And so that's another PSA. You know, if you find a stray dog, look for local shelters.
Or cat or rabbit, honestly, any stray.
Yeah, any strays. I'm thinking about hiking. I mean, some people hike with their cats. That's pretty cool. But if you're hiking, the PSA is just, you know, look at your local shelters, but also look at bordering county shelters if you lose your pet. It's really important.
Okay, so another story, Mary, you said that you had personally experienced losing a pet, and then the next day you got her microchip to prevent her from wandering off and being lost. Well, I actually have a little story. My dad, he has a dog, and he used to take her to where he worked every day. He had a shop, and they had big roll-up doors, and she was pretty good about sticking close, but she's pretty friendly, so if she sees someone, she's like, oh, hey, who are you? And so she actually went to the business next door. It was kind of like across a little side street, actually, and they found her, and she had her tags on, but it had our home address. I was living with my parents at the time, and so it had the home address, not the shop where she was. So I think they were probably really confused, like, what are you doing here? So they took her to the local shelter in that area, and luckily she was microchipped, and they called my dad, and he's like, yeah, she was gone for like 5 minutes, and then they took her to
all the way because they thought shelter. They were doing what was best for that dog.
Yeah, but if they they did do the right thing. They got her safe. They kept her from wandering and maybe going into the road. I mean, I don't think she would have, but there's always that risk too. You want to, if you have an animal, you want to keep them safe. And so she wandered on over to make some new friends, and then they didn't know her very well, and so they didn't realize that she was my dad's dog right across the little side street. And she was sitting there, you know, luckily she hadn't been in there long, but it definitely was an experience that kind of gave everyone a panic. And thank goodness, you know, she had her name tag and her microchip, and she was brought back home, you know, same day, within just an hour or so of wandering over to the neighboring business.
I always say 3 forms of identification at all times: on the harness, on the collar, and a microchip. Yeah, I want my animal back. Thankfully, I've never had to deal with my dog ending up in a shelter because of an escape. But we know huskies. They like to run.
Yeah, if any of you have ever looked on our site or probably many other shelters' websites, you tend to see a lot of found huskies, like huskies that have been brought here because they're little adventurers that follow their nose, their eyes, their whatever they feel like following, and they can get themselves into some mischief.
Yeah, that's for sure. Digging under things and whatnot.
Not Sweet Grimly, though, who's here in office with us today.
Yeah, she's our guest speaker.
Yep. She's been a very good, quiet guest speaker, though.
Thanks so much for joining us. We post episodes every other Thursday, so come back and listen soon.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe, share it with others, leave a rating or a review. And if you have questions that you want us to answer on a future episode, go ahead to our website, which is thehumanesociety.org/podcast, and submit your questions. To catch all the latest from the Humane Society for Tacoma and Pierce County, you can also check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Tacoma Humane.
See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you, guys.